All right, we are live. Maybe you heard our little back and forth about Werner Herzog's love of Fred Astaire. Maybe not, but now you know it. It's November 7th, 2025. It is the Prospect Weekly Roundup, our list of what you need to know that happened this week, and quite a lot happened this week. So we're going to have a good discussion here. I'm David Dayen, executive editor, and with me today is our editor at large, who's burning the midnight oil, pouring over election results all week. Harold Meyerson, how you doing?
I am doing well.
You are doing well, and the Democrats are doing well. They had a resounding off year election victory
Like off
here.
Broadway.
Yes, exactly. And Broadway was implicated in New York City with the mayor race, as well as big wins in the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, and also huge margins of victory in statewide races in two of the most important swing states in America, Pennsylvania, where the Supreme Court judicial retention elections, 20-point victories across the board for those Democratic judges, and in Georgia, where the Public Service Commissioner, which is basically the state utility regulator, they are statewide elections in Georgia, and in a seat, in a state where Donald Trump won by 2 points in 2024, the Democrats defeated Republican incumbents by 26 points in 2025. So obviously, different composition of the electorate, but still pretty impressive victories. And also here in my home state of California, Prop 50 to counter the Texas gerrymandering with the gerrymandering of our own. And that is putting a real dent in the Trump scheme to kind of rig the midterm elections next year. But my first question to you, Harold, is so we've had 5 elections when Trump is president, right? So I'm counting 17, 18, 19, 20, and 25. And Donald Trump is 0 and 5. He has lost every one of those elections, and usually by pretty big margins. So why isn't it conventional wisdom that when Donald Trump is in a governing position, he is a unique lead weight on the Republican Party?
Well, this is the subject of a piece I wrote that we'll post on Monday, and I think the headline I put on it was "Candidate Trump boosts Republican turnout, President Trump boosts Democratic turnout," and they're really, in looking in aggregate as you just did at all the elections in which he's either been a candidate or has been president. There's really a stark contrast, and I would add that, while pollsters took heat for underestimating Trump's support in 2016 and 2024, they're not yet taking heat for underestimating how he does when he's in office, because the results of Tuesday's elections across the board, as you said, all across the nation, completely exceeded what any poll was showing about, I
Right.
mean, the New Jersey governor's race between Michael.
Particularly
Yeah.
there in New
Yeah.
Jersey,
I
right?
mean,
I mean, that was almost a tie
yeah,
according to
people
the
were
polls.
saying that, she would probably squeak through in New Jersey, and she ended up squeaking through by 13 percentage points, and the
Right.
Democrats picking up a slew of legislative seats. Similarly, in Virginia, people said, well, Spanberger will win probably high single digits. High single digits turned out to be somewhere between 15 and 16% margin. And the Democrats went from a 51 to 49 majority in the lower house of the Virginia legislature to a 64 to 36 majority.
Right.
And there was a wonderful quote from the speaker of the Democratic speaker of the Virginia House saying, well, we saw a little wave coming. We weren't prepared for this doggone tsunami. So, I mean, his astonishment actually exceeded his happiness,
Right.
based on that. And so, I think these really are two distinct electorates. When Trump is out of office, he delivers these scathing, often completely unfounded criticisms of what's going on in the country and the Democratic incumbents. And that really, we know draws out part of the MAGA base, particularly, like the young guys who, really respond to Trump's rhetoric about, and you
Yeah.
just want to screw the system, etc. They really come out for that. I think their anger level subsides a little when he's actually president. They have fewer things to be angry about, but Democratic anger
Right.
at all of the outrages he inflicts upon decency and the country, et cetera, just soars. So we almost have two kinds of Trump elections, when he's in and when he's out.
Right. And when he's out, it's, I would call it a barstool electorate.
Yeah,
Like he
yeah.
just carps from the bar stool about how bad everything is, and that somehow attracts people. And, I mean, we've seen this, the party out of power engaged more uh, over and over again. It's a Trump phenomenon, but it's not uniquely a
No,
Trump
it's not.
phenomenon.
It's not unique to Trump, but he really,
Right.
as he does in many things, pushes the limits of the possible on this because it's such a stark
Right.
contrast,
I mean, I think
and
the
it's such
greatest, yeah,
it's a very different electorate.
the greatest example of that is also in Virginia, the attorney general's race, right?
Oh yeah,
Where Jay Jones had this scandal where he was, fantasizing about the deaths of his political opponents.
and their
This
families.
and their families. This got a huge amount of attention, and he ends up winning in by the mid single digits. And my favorite exit poll result of the night was that people were asked if those texts were disqualifying, and 9% of the people who said yes, these are disqualifying, voted for Jay Jones, which is either a misunderstanding of the word disqualifying, or saying, you know what, that's kind of mood I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a yes, but, and the but is yeah, but I hate and fear Donald Trump more.
Exactly.
And that was a lot of what the election was about. But it's also, as you pointed out, in the two Georgia seats that flopped and flipped, it's also about, in the broadest sense, Trump's handling of the economy and his,
Right.
behavioral indifference to the cost of living and other living conditions of actually existing Americans. That was clearly the other huge factor in this
Yeah.
election was the
No question.
affordability question. And boy, did that flip Latino voters who, in surprising numbers, shifted over to voting for Trump in 2024, clearly disgruntled, at least with the Biden economy and the late rate of inflation there, but a massive return to Democratic ranks. For essentially many of the same reasons they voted against Biden. And this should be, though God only knows if it will be, a wake-up call to the Trump people to maybe he should pay a little attention to what's actually going on.
Well, I want to get into that, but I don't want to leave this bit without making this provocation. I think Trump likes it that Republicans do badly when he's not on the ballot. I really do. I truly do. And I mean, Trump's initial reaction to the election results was he said, pollsters are telling me that it's bad when I'm not on the ballot. So, he takes a certain pleasure in it, even if it's a referendum on his governing.
Yeah.
He's happy because Trump kind of ruins everything near him, right? And so he is secretly happy that Republicans. It feeds his ego.
Well, yeah, I mean, this
Yeah,
is a guy who sees every interaction as either he wins or loses. And so his
Right.
take on this election was, well, I won over the Republicans.
Right. I beat
I
the
mean,
Republicans. Right. Yeah,
that's right. I
exactly.
did better than they did. And look, I mean, anyone concerned about the election might have thought that saying you're going to deny back pay to the more than 100,000 laid off federal workers in Virginia was not a smooth move, or that, it was more important for him as a way of being seen to screw New York to cancel a much needed tunnel under the Hudson River, which really, a lot of people in Jersey really
Right.
want one more tunnel. So,
I mean, you look
these
at
are
the
not,
numbers,
yeah,
look at the numbers in Union County, in all of those collar counties that
yeah,
are essentially New York City suburbs,
yeah.
full of people who travel into New York City for work. And those numbers were like Bushwick numbers. They were like 80-20 plus numbers
Yeah.
for Sherrill and against Chitterelli,
But it
who
was,
was the
yeah,
Republican
but it
Trump
was
endorsed
more
candidate.
important for Trump to personally screw New York than, what would have been a prudent, reasonable calculation that, oh, this might hurt Jersey,
Right,
Chitterelli and Republicans in Jersey. I mean,
right.
sheesh.
So, okay, let's go on to this affordability question because I think it's absolutely huge. And I think that it is most manifested in electricity bills. That just happens to be the thing. It's electric bills are going up at double the rate of inflation. It just so happens that the second highest increase in electricity bills this year is in New Jersey. It's a 22% increase. There's a variety of factors for that. And there was one election in Georgia, in a swing state, where electric bills essentially were directly on the ballot. And then there are these other elections where electric bills and sort of the circumstances around them were indirectly on the ballot. New Jersey is one where Mikey Sherrill, in her closing argument, said she's going to freeze electricity rates. The other is Virginia, which is the highest concentration of data centers anywhere in the country, if not the world.
Right.
And, Spanberger talked about data centers. There was a local candidate who flipped a Trump seat specifically and directly going after data center build out, and the effect on the electricity grid from that. So electric bills have become sort of the synecdoche for affordability. They've stood in for this cost of living challenge because the rate at which they are going up and are anticipated to go up because of this continued build out for these questionable benefits of AI. That's where I think we've centered the affordability argument.
And, people who have are following this and following the glut of data centers and their effect on their electric bills also probably know that data centers are not, this isn't like building an old-fashioned General Motors factory. It's not going to generate a lot of jobs for the community. It's
Right,
not going to bring more money into the community. It's going to take more money out of the community via these electric bills. So, it's hard to,
right.
see the net positive here, almost even apart from what it does to your electric bill.
And then the question becomes, what do you do with this as a Democratic Party from a governing standpoint? So, as I said, Cheryl is talking about calling a state of emergency to freeze electric rates. That might give some short term relief, but there's got to be a long term agenda here. What Trump is doing by blocking the development of renewable energy, there at this point, there is no energy source that we can say, no, we're not going to do that. And it's very, very overt, blocking solar deals, blocking offshore wind deals, that, Trump is at odds with the electorate on that
And
point.
and again, his as automakers are either cutting back or just closing their EV factories. Again, the
Right.
employment aspects of this are also just entirely negative. So it's
Yeah.
it's a lose-lose on cost to consumers, and it's a lose-lose on employment.
Now, stunting the growth of EV take up actually paradoxically reduces electricity demand to a certain extent. But that is more than swamped by the fact that every tech firm is building these giant energy hogs and not, in the exchange. And I think this is an interesting potential policy plank is in the exchange, they are not funding the residential and commercial electrification upgrades that are needed for this transition and to maintain and stabilize demand. So, if a company wants to build a data center, not only should they be paying as a large load customer for any infrastructure upgrades needed to meet that demand, but we should also get a community benefit out of that. And the community benefit could be we're going to electrify your house. We're going to facilitate rooftop solar. We're going to do something that has allows, because in the absence of jobs, what is the community getting out other than a little bit of tax revenue, maybe because sometimes that tax revenue is going to be denied or abated because we got to attract this data center. So what's the community benefit? Maybe it is facilitating the energy transition.
And as you're suggesting, these are issues which both Cheryl and Spamberger, sort of dealt with in a preliminary way.
Right.
But it also indicates, and your writing sort of lays this out, what the Democrats need to do and get really serious about, because this is going to be, a major issue, and
Yeah.
it's one on which the Democrats can take some seriously pro-public positions, which the I think folks would appreciate.
I think aligning on what to do about this explosion of
Yeah.
AI infrastructure is going to be a huge flashpoint as we go forward at the community level, and then I think it's going to go all the way up to the federal level.
Yeah, but on in between the two, there are a lot of Democratic governors who can make hay with this because
100%.
I mean Sheryl and Spanberger just sort of dip their toe into the pool, but there are a lot of governors who can set some criteria, and that would be an important step.
Yeah. Now, I want to move on to now that there are a couple things in Virginia that I think are very interesting. There's now this massive House of Delegates majority, but the Senate majority is the same. No
Right,
Senate seats were on the ballot in
right.
Virginia this year. So the Senate is still pretty closely divided, but you have a robust House of Delegates majority. And there are two things I want to talk about with regard to that. The first one, near and dear to you, is that Virginia remains a right to work state. And the during the campaign, Abigail Spanberger essentially said that she did not really want to change that. And unions, you would know more than I that, but it appeared that unions backed her anyway.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And but now that they have a really big House of Delegates lead, it seems impossible to me that the House of Delegates would just pass on trying to repeal right to work.
Well, Virginia has a history, if you go back, you don't have to go back that far, of being a southern state. And of course, it was the southern states
Mm-hmm.
that immediately enacted the so-called right to work laws when this was legalized, when the Taft-Hartley bill passed in 1947. And it's unlike any other state controlled by Democrats, with the very weird semi-exception of Colorado. It
Right.
has never confronted this, even as the state has grown, not consistently, but generally more blue. I mean, they're back to a trifecta, which they've had a number of times before in this century and in the late 20th century of
Yeah.
non-Dixiecrat Democrats. So yeah, you would, but there's been kind of a oh, well, this is what Virginia is like. And, it's also the case that the one Democratic senator who has consistently distanced himself uh, from the rest of the Democratic Senate delegation which would like to get rid of right to work is Virginia's Mark Warner.
Right.
There's been a kind of, I think, resignation for a long time, even among a number of Virginia unions, that, oh Christ, we're never going to get this overturned. But yeah, with 64 members in the Virginia
Yeah.
House of Delegates, the line from Hillel, if not now, when, comes comes to mind.
100%. So that'll be interesting to see. I've also been talking to some folks in Colorado, which you referred to, another Democratic state that doesn't have good union policies. And Jared Polis vetoed a bill that would have changed Colorado law to make it easier to you know join unions and set up unions. The two Democrats who are running to replace Polis, one is the current Attorney General Phil Weiser, and the other is Michael Bennet, the actual U.S. senator who's going to try to become governor there. And neither of them are talking about that either, about labor laws. So, but because there's a primary, there's an opportunity there for unions to say, okay, who are you going to side with? And then we'll side with you. So we'll see what happens there. The second thing that I want to talk about regarding Virginia is this big surprise that they embarked on, even with their narrow majorities pre-election, to do a redistricting of the congressional map, which now they are in prime position to complete. The way it's a very Byzantine process, but apparently they had to undertake a vote before the
Yes,
election. They have
yes,
to undertake another one very quickly, once they're seated.
yeah,
And then there's a referendum that also very quickly has to go before voters. And if that is passed, then they can change into new maps, much like Prop 50 in California, which had to go before voters after the
right.
legislature affirmed it.
Well, the law in Virginia said two successive sessions of the legislature had to vote on this. So they had to get it done while it was still the old legislature, and now they are
Right.
going to get it done when it's the new legislature. I think what Virginia is doing is sort of the belatedly getting with the religion, as it were. And they're not alone in that. Now you see the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, saying, okay, we're going to push through a redistricting to get one more seat here.
Right.
And you're seeing more of this. And, Gavin Newsom in his Tuesday night victory talk, said in essence, okay, we've done it here. Please, let's my fellow Democratic governors and fellow Democrats around the country where you have the power to do it, let's do it there. And it's becoming now more, particularly since Prop 50 passed by something like 64 to 36.
Right.
It's becoming more of a national battle cry for Democrats because it just makes strategic sense. It's hard to argue against
Yes.
letting the Republicans hang on to the House by virtue of their redistricting.
We are going from the when they go low, we go high moment to the fight fire with fire moment
Yes,
that Newsom kicked off in August, announcing this election at a time when there was not total certainty that California was going to go along with this necessarily. And living out here, what I know is that the no side of Prop 50 called off the dogs about a month ago. They stopped running ads. They stopped sending mailers. The last mailer I got was probably in September, late September, and they basically said we can't fight this because Newsom had credibly nationalized this to say this is about Trump, and if you want to beat Trump, you have to pass this. And it didn't matter what this was. It was just this is the thing that you have to pass to beat Trump. And they did that. And you're right that it has spurred Democratic fight fire with fire tactics all around the country, which could lead to some détente. One of the more interesting but obscure things that happened on Tuesday night is that the state of Kansas basically called off their redistricting attempt. Kansas is a state that has one Democratic representative, Sharice Davids. They were going to try to rejigger the map to basically gerrymander her out of a seat. David said, well, if you do that, I'm running for Senate and I'm going to challenge Roger Marshall and I'm going to win. And the state Senate, which has, they need a supermajority to do that because there's a Democratic governor in Kansas. So they needed basically maximum support. They do have a supermajority in the legislature, but they needed essentially all of them to agree with this. And they just couldn't get the votes. And so they backed off. And I think there may be more backing off here for a very key reason. And it has to do with Latino voters. And you alluded to this before about Latino voters. But if you look at Texas's gerrymander, for example, it is predicated on the idea that Donald Trump's support for Latino voters will maintain and hold for the purposes of future elections. And so when they redistricted, they have some, pretty large Latino populations in seats that Trump won by a good deal of points. And if those Latinos go back to their more traditional voting patterns, then those seats that they redistricted for Republicans might not stay that way. Right. And in addition, other Republican incumbents who they took votes from to get, in that position to redistrict these seats also might have problems. And other states are looking at that and saying, well, if we do this redistricting thing and we try to assure ourselves new seats for Republicans, what if it ends up affecting the incumbent Republicans and they lose their seat?
Right, which incumbent Republicans are, concerned about. There are really two factors with the switch in the Latino vote. One, overwhelmingly, it's always been clear that they respond to economic conditions first and foremost. That is to say, they're normal human beings. But also, as normal human beings, the way the Trump deportation policy has been carried out it definitely has an estranging effect on a number of Latino families as well. And I would argue one factor in the overwhelming victory of Prop 50 was, it took time for people in the state to realize, okay, this is really about stopping Trump. And how has Trumpism been most manifested in California? By the militarization of
Right.
cities, by the wave of deportations, which clearly, reaches into families and communities and takes away people who were pillars of both. Yes, the Latino vote did massively shift. It essentially went more than about 2-1 for Democrats in statewide elections. And if you look at the breakdown by race in working class votes, so where you have the white working class, which still, voted Republican in most of these elections. But Republicans were particularly coming off the 2024 election, thinking they really had broken into the Black and Latino working class.
Right.
Well, in the statewide elections, Democrats carried working class voters
Right.
of color by something like 75 to 25 or 80 to 20. So
Right.
much for that.
And there was another aspect of this, another part of the electorate that Democrats began to carry. And here, I can't believe we're a half hour into this conversation and we haven't uttered the name Zoran Mamdani.
Right, right,
But that part of the electorate that I was alluding to is obviously young voters.
right.
And young men, for example, went for Mikey Sherrill by 56%. which was seen as this lost generation to the Democrats in favor of podcast bros and right leaning commentators. So that seemed to be sort of a false dawn as well. And and then we get to New York City, where it's not just where how young voters voted, but how they turned out.
Right.
It's something like 300% of the 2021 electorate for voters aged
Right.
18 to 29. It was the largest electorate for a New York City mayor's race since 1969.
Right.
And I think at this point we have to talk about Mamdani and what he did, because it really is kind of a stunning turn of events in American politics. What do you make of that? And why do you think that someone who was at 1% in the polls just by in February was able to do this?
Well, you start with the fact that he is just a very gifted politician, and I'm abstracting that from his particular voting basis. I mean, he's a once in a generation communicator, and a lot of that is just reflects his personality, I think, which is both articulate and warm, which people aren't necessarily used to seeing in political leaders. But then the politics of American cities, major American cities, are where you find immigrants and clusters of young people. That's who
Right,
disproportionately live in America's big cities, and that political stew has been one of the factors, I think, pushing cities further to the left, combined with the fact that it's the major cities that are increasingly unaffordable. So you put all of that together in your equation, x plus y, etc., and it equals someone like Mandami in New York, but also the really left mayors we've been seeing around the country for the last 15 years or so. I mean, I think, that most of them, the vast majority of them, don't describe themselves as democratic socialists. But if you asked, if you have the political space to do it, would you support the Mandami platform? I think the mayor of LA, the mayor of Chicago, the mayor of most American cities would say, sure. And as to
right,
the, and then also, speaking of the young people, it's young people who are most bearing the brunt of unaffordability. In particular, in cities, they can't afford to buy a house. Rent
right.
is onerous. Student loans still hang over them. So these are the folks who look around. Jobs, the number of open jobs in the job market continues to fall.
Right.
And any number of them therefore conclude that, gee, actually existing capitalism isn't working for me. And
Right.
the median age of DSA members is young. The 104,000 people who walked precincts for Mandami over the last year are disproportionately young. And it just makes sense.
This is a stunning number, 104,000
God, is it
volunteers
ever?
in one mayoral race.
Yeah.
And apparently there is now sort of an outside organization called Our Time that has been built to keep those people engaged. Everyone thinks back to after 2008 and what Obama did to Obama for America, which became Organizing for America, which then got folded into the Democratic National Committee and subsequently extinguished, essentially. So it will be interesting to see what happens with this outside group. It's not a Mamdani group per se. It's a C4 outside organization, but it is buying the list of all of those volunteers and will have access to keep them engaged and involved.
And they need to be, because if Mandami is going to get his platform realized, he needs particular legislation in Albany. And the way
That's
he's
right.
going to get particular legislation in Albany if those 104,000 and then several other 100,000 who voted for Mamdani, open a line of communication with their particular legislator, and most of the Democratic legislators in Albany come from New York City, and say, "Damn it, we need to hike the tax on people with on their incomes over $1 million if we're going to get affordable child care."
That, yes.
They have a pretty clear mission, and I think enough of them understand that to the point that you won't see, I hope, you won't see what happened to Obama for America, which is effectively just its disappearance.
Demobilization. Yes, and we have an excellent piece actually at prospect.org that you can go to right now from our friends at New York Focus, who focus on Albany and the political power structures there, talking about how unions are going to be central to this fight, talking about how New York legislators seem to be backing up Mamdani and trying to turn Kathy Hochul into an island of one against this policy, but also some of the practical challenges. The fact that Trump has diminished spending that eventually winds up in the hands of states means that there's going to be some competition for any new dollars that are created at the state level. Some lawmakers are going to want to backfill those existing policies rather than writing new ones. So there are real practical challenges there, and it's a great piece. You could read it at
Yeah, and
prospect.org.
that makes doing things like raising the taxes on you know, over $1 million annual incomes all the more important precisely because they will have to both fill gaps and
Yeah, and
carry out
I think
Mamdani's agenda.
Mamdani realizes that he's only going to be as successful uh, as it relates to achieving and delivering on those promises in a
Right.
way that's sort of unlike, I think, a lot of politicians. I think he really does internalize that and understand that he's only going to be as good as how fast the buses go or how
Right.
much cheaper rent can be or et cetera.
And we need to explain that New York's loss of sovereignty and things like raising taxes within city limits it was created during the 1970s fiscal crisis of New York, when that
Right,
was a condition for the city not going bankrupt, and
right,
it's still around today. Just as in California, localities lost the capacity to raise property tax also in the 70s with Proposition 13. And so we deal with all these weird workarounds that were created at the more or less at the beginning of the Reagan era, and
right.
they haunt us still.
There's another city where that's the case, where we did it was completely off the radar in the elections because the election essentially was decided in September, and that's Michelle Wu's race in
Right.
Boston, where she ran effectively unopposed in the general election, successfully getting reelected by resounding margins on a very progressive agenda, and so this idea that Mamdani is maybe a one-off, unique to a city that is very cosmopolitan, or whatever the arguments are, is belied by the fact that just up the Northeast corridor, you have someone who's 4 years into this project.
Right. Right. And as I said, I don't think his politics actually would strike any number of Democratic mayors as something that they couldn't get behind. It's simply their own political terrain that they're scared
Right.
of or whatever, or the loss of sovereignty, which I just described. So this is where American cities are headed. And this is a real issue for the Democrats because the polling shows widespread theoretical support among the Democratic base, more approval rating for socialism, which both the Pew poll and the Gallup poll show 66, 67% favorability rating for socialism as against the high 40% for capitalism. And that I'm overgeneralizing like crazy, but that's urban Democrats speaking, and you can't just wish them away, as some in the party would like to.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's why delivering is going to be so important. That's why sort
Yes,
of sewer socialism is going to
exactly.
be the watchword here. And so I think we've come to a point where we need to do some obituaries, both political and literal. The first, I think, we have to talk about Andrew Cuomo, who's sort of had his swan song here with two ignominious defeats in a row in rapid succession, ending the career of this one-time power broker in New York who ran, among the worst campaigns that I think I've seen in a long while. Really rooted in a huge sense of entitlement over who gets to serve and govern. Do you have any thoughts on the
Yeah,
end
well,
of Cuomoism?
you know, uh, pretty much people thought that when he had to resign as governor because 13 women had accused him of sexual harassment, that, this was the nadir, this was the low point. But he has amazingly managed
Yeah,
to have a
he found a
downward
shovel.
spiral that keeps going lower and lower. I mean, in the Democratic primary, this entitlement sense was just conveyed. He didn't go out very much to campaign. He simply called up the institutions that had formerly supported him and said that he expected them to
Yeah,
support
and
him
said,
again.
"Support
So
me
how
or
could he go
else."
lower than that? Well, he concluded the general election with themes almost of Islamophobia.
Yeah,
Uh, so, every time you think Andrew has hit rock bottom, he surprises us by finding still a lower level of hell in which to descend. So,
yeah,
it's beyond at this juncture, it's more or less even beyond pathetic. And when you consider the esteem in which his father was held, some of that I think was a little overblown, but nonetheless, his father did earn a good deal of that esteem, if only as an orator.
right.
At the 1984 Democratic Convention, he was already talking highly articulately and movingly about a two-tier economy, which had only begun really to separate. And to have it conclude with his son, doing what he did is a pretty
Right.
dismal story.
It was pretty interesting when uh, Mamdani in his election night speech quoted Mario Cuomo, where he
Right.
said, talked about governing in campaigning in poetry and governing in prose, and then he sort of turned that on its head a little bit. But
Yes.
there were a lot of real twists of the knife that Mamdani
Yes.
used in that election night speech. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I look forward to Andrew Cuomo just living on a boat somewhere in the Everglades. But uh, let's move on to another person who sort of ended and capped her political career in a way that was far more graceful than Andrew Cuomo. I don't want to compare the two,
That's a low
but it
bar
was
to clear.
but in the yes, that's true. In the past several weeks, it became very clear that Prop 50 was going to be Nancy Pelosi's last campaign,
Right.
and she fundraised very heavily for it. She worked very hard on the campaign trail for it, and indeed, the day after the election, she announced that she would no longer, maybe 2 days after, she announced she would no longer uh, run for reelection to the House, and this caps a 39-year career in the U.S. House of Representatives with two speakerships. You've followed Pelosi for a long, long time, and you wrote about it for us at prospect.org this week. Maybe you could just give us some of your thoughts.
Actually, I did a cover story on her for the magazine, I think in 2005. And it was really, I mean, she had already impressed members across the ideological spectrum of the Democratic Party as early as the first few years in the House, actually during Papa Bush's presidency, for just her political smarts. But
Right.
she was the number two Democrat in the House when the Bush people were compelling Congress to vote on authorizing going to war in Iraq, a vote they wanted right before the November 2002 election because they figured, they could run against the Democrats who oppose this. Well, the Democratic leader in the House then was Dick Gephardt. And he decided, okay, I'm going to vote yes. We should vote yes because we don't want to be on the wrong side of this. Pelosi was the number two. She said, no, I'm going to vote no. And she persuaded a majority of House Democrats to vote no on this war, which was, uh, one possibly the greatest unforced error in American foreign policy since God knows when. Uh, and when she became Speaker for the first time after the 2006 election, she then remained Speaker in the first 2 years of Barack Obama's presidency. And her single greatest achievement was getting the Affordable Care Act through the House with no votes to spare. She knew exactly.
But more important, getting it through Rahm Emanuel.
Yes, Rahm Emanuel was chief of staff for Barack Obama, and when it really encountered difficulties, he suggested scaling it back to the point that would have been insignificant.
Right.
Pelosi said, hell no, I can get the votes for this. Look, this is a woman. I mean, this is why the Prop 50 thing is such an appropriate capstone to her speakership. She knew everything about every member's political pressures, their districts, who funded them, who was a pressure group within their district. Yeah, we need your vote. And look, you can still be reelected. Here's how if you vote for this. Now, we can lose your vote because she made that calculation. She did it precisely well. And that's why there are tens of millions of people on the AC, although Trump wants to cut the
Yeah.
number, and the
Uh, uh,
Republicans have voted to cut the number.
right.
That's why it exists at all. She did a kind of replay of this in the first 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency when she was speaker, shepherding through the industrial policy bills and the infrastructure bills and such. And again, she did this. She really took the lead on this. And when you look at the history of speakers of the House and landmark legislation, most previous speakers, even the ones whose names we remember, really didn't play much of a role. The New Deal legislation of Franklin Roosevelt passed when the speakers were essentially ciphers.
Mhm.
John McCormick, who led the House Democrats during the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, didn't play a major role in the civil rights and the Medicare, Medicaid, Great Society legislation. All of them also had much bigger Democratic majorities than Pelosi did when she was Speaker. So they were squeaker Democratic majorities. She navigated them through anyway. And even someone like Newt Gingrich, himself a former Speaker,
Yeah.
has said, yeah, look, when it comes to, the master of legislation, she is at the top of the list, and that she is and
Well, look,
remains.
I certainly you can probably find in the archives that I've had differences with Speaker Pelosi on
Right.
a number of occasions, but I do very much respect her political acumen, and that's not just me saying that, but that was Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that this
Right.
week, the
Right.
exact same thing, like that she respected her ability to get things done, which she doesn't see in the Republican Party. Um, so,
And look, Pelosi was not a leftist as such at all.
oh no.
And,
In fact, her one and only race where she was
yeah,
contested from the left legitimately.
yeah.
You write about that, and it was against Harry Britt, who was an ally of Harvey Milk's
An ally of Harvey
in
Milk and
San
a member
Francisco.
of DSA, and this being
Yeah,
1987 in Chicago,
87.
I
Yeah,
I did some work for Harry Britt, the truth be known.
right,
Not paid, just
right,
volunteer. But what I said about Pelosi is that she's the left wing of the congressionally possible,
right,
uh, and I think that's I
right.
think that's true. She didn't have any particular ideological vision when Robert Rubin articulated the mainstream of democratic economic thinking, which is pure neoliberalism. She would invite him to speak to the caucus after 2008, when it was clear that, but only when it was clear that was not where Democrats should go. She stopped inviting Robert Rubin. That's who she is.
She would get to things sometimes belatedly, but she would get around to them.
Yes.
We got about 10 minutes left, and so we should reserve that for the last obituary of the week. And this is a literal obituary
Yes.
of Dick Cheney, the former vice president, who I would say, and I think you said this in your writing about him, was as responsible for as anyone for the current Trumpian turn to aggrandize executive power. And this was done in a systematic way during the Bush administration, which was really stage managed by Dick Cheney, and even as far back as when he was, chief of staff to Gerald Ford, and
Right.
in that era. So go
Right.
ahead.
No, no, he didn't go full unitary executive, but he certainly was an advocate of cutting corners, keeping Congress out of decisions. And whereas W certainly hated Saddam Hussein and wanted to go to war with him, it was Cheney's people who concocted these ridiculous fantasies about Saddam Hussein's involvement in 9/11, about the nuclear threat that Saddam posed to civilization as we know it, and so on. From Scooter
And
Libby.
planted the evidence
Yes, yes,
in the media that they would then refer to as independent confirmation of their theories.
exactly, exactly. And one other prefiguring of Trumpism. It was during W's presidency when confronted with the obvious fact that the Iraq War was not going well, that a senior White House person said, "Well, you're in the reality-based community."
Right.
And it was under Bush and particularly under Cheney, uh, who, was a mastermind of a web of deceit, that Republicans felt, okay, we can divorce ourselves from the reality-based
Right.
community. And if we
Uh-huh.
have enough media, cowed by us or actually working for us, we
Yeah.
can get away with that.
Yes, absolutely. And you don't think of Cheney much in the economic context, but Cheney was also the guy who said that Reagan proved deficits don't matter. And that justified several rounds of tax cuts and putting the Iraq war on the credit cards. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And
Uh,
look, one reason our economy is so profoundly misshapen is Reagan cutting the high, cutting virtually in half the highest tax brackets. I mean, if we were in the era of Eisenhower tax brackets, you just wouldn't have billionaires. It wouldn't pencil out. But they were all part of dismantling that.
And of course, Cheney, I like to go through this because the kids don't know about, people whose political consciousness goes back maybe to early Obama or something like that, don't realize what was done in those two terms, where Cheney, first of all, Cheney led the search committee for a vice president and then found himself.
Yes,
Um,
that was a giveaway that
right.
unfortunate things were going to happen.
He started a energy task force that then was conducted entirely in secrets. He worked for Halliburton prior to coming into the government. He attempts to get information about what was happening about the setting of energy policy behind closed doors, was met with Dick Cheney saying that he existed in a fourth branch of government because he was both in the executive branch as the vice president, but also in the legislative branch as the president of the Senate. And he tried to use that to evade any accountability or responsibility to turn over documents. It was a real prefiguring of this idea that executive privilege is total, that presidents and executives can do no wrong, and that they can concoct elaborate theories to get out of the basic accountability mechanisms that we have hardwired into our government.
And following 9/11, the Bush and Cheney was the master of this, went for domestic surveillance and foreign torture kept out of, in secret facilities, sometimes run
Dark
by
sites.
client other
Yeah.
governments. And all of this, had a disregard for the Constitution, for the military's laws of wars, and for what are supposedly are American values, all of which Trump inherited and has, gone even lower. And so, if you want to find the tipping point towards that in at least Republican statecraft, you're brought right back to Dick Cheney.
I agree. What you're seeing right now in the Caribbean and the Pacific with the blowing up of boats without any kind of due process, without any evidentiary basis. Just go back to going to war in Iraq after 9/11, which they had nothing to do with. Go back to the use of black sites and kidnapping people off the streets. Is that just a Trump thing? No, that happened all over the world, including in places like Milan, where they would kidnap
Right.
suspected terrorists who, in some cases, had nothing to do with terrorism, and then render them to Guantanamo Bay or these black sites all around the world. So, a lot of this goes back to Dick Cheney, and I think that to newbies in politics, Dick Cheney is a Republican who turned against Trump. He did an ad against Trump in recent years. His daughter, Liz Cheney, did sort of a tour with Kamala Harris last year, which had relatively meager benefits, I think, for Kamala Harris. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about here kind of went down the memory hole. Uh,
Right.
yeah,
Well, I referred to this in writing about him as a sort of not quite deathbed conversion. But what it was, I think, I mean, in addition to the fact that, Trump went after his daughter, so okay, so that's got to be part of it. But as well, look, Cheney had this kind of Manichaean view of the world, America versus the axis of evil. And of course, axis of evil is such a flexible phrase that it's entirely up to the guy who says it to determine who is in that axis. And Trump's policy is to extort everyone, whether they're in the axis of evil or our longtime friend and neighbor. So it is a repudiation of some of the neoconservative worldview, which he more than anyone personified. So that was a legitimate difference. But the irony, as we've both been saying, is that he paved the way for Trump, even if he didn't like ultimately, the real world manifestations of a lot of what Trump is doing.
right. Particularly with the legal theories, the unitary executive,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
ability to try to hive off executive power away from the checks and balances that we have in our government.
Right.
Um, all right. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts or anything. We just have a couple minutes left. We certainly could wrap this up early if you like. Uh, I'll
Well,
give you
I
the
just want to
final
say
word.
to get back to our initial discussion that I think the Democrats have stumbled on a way forward, and that if they keep the emphasis on affordability, on the reasons why things have gotten so out of whack in the economy. Look, affordability became a through line that connected Democrats as different as Zoran Mandami on the one hand and Mikey Sherrill on the other side of the Hudson on
Right.
the other hand. I mean, for people who say, well, we've got all these, different tendencies, which, by the way, Gavin Newsom managed to escape entirely by simply representing the resistance, and that's how he's identified, rather than belonging to any political tendency, rightly or wrongly, that's how he's identified.
Yep.
I think it should be apparent to Democrats how to go forward, and they've been able to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory before, but this provided, I think, a very helpful lesson.
Well, yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, I'll give a sneak preview. Our next issue, a print issue of the American Prospect, is going to be entirely about affordability and the drivers, some of them long-standing
Yeah.
drivers of affordability and the affordability crisis that we're seeing manifest right now, and hopefully by piecing out the causes, that we can better understand what the solutions can be. So that's about all the time we have. Thank you, Harold Meyerson, editor at large, The American Prospect.
Great to be here as always, David.
Great. And we do this every Friday at 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 Pacific. You will be able to see a version of this on the website at prospect.org. We'll put the video up there. So tell your friends, if you're watching this, to check it out if you liked it. And we will be back next week. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.